Hey, it's Soul with another video, brought to you by the wonderful people's names that are above my head. This is a video blog, by the way, so prepare yourself. Over the past few days or weeks, I've been observing conversations, discussions, and good old regular bitching about the notion of account-wide essences, which is not the topic of today's video, but it's what came out of this subject that I would like to focus on once I finish getting around to it. The other day I decided to chime in, knowing the futility of trying to engage in a debate that isn't really a debate, but it's more like a contest of who can say the same talking points louder than the other, and who decides to stop first. Spoiler alert, I stopped first. Many of the responses I got back summed up to wanting account-wide essences because it's a drag to grind and regrind the requirements on alts, which only scratches the surface of what's actually going on, but it is a valid critique. It's important to point out that the essence system in Battle for Azeroth was allegedly not a planned feature in the expansion's original design. It was a response to an already beleaguered Azerite trade system which, in so few words, just didn't work out all that well. It's less of an excuse to let Blizzard off the hook for thinking this system through. It's just a fun little fact. Anyway, back to the debate. My canned response to a topic like this is to argue that it's okay to not have the best essence available. This always comes from a personal perspective, as a raid leader of a heroic raiding guild, or maybe a nobody trash guild, depending on how you feel about what you define as a sense of accomplishment. But I'd rather encourage my team to perform the best that they are able to, using the opportunities that they can afford, and not what a website expects their performance to be. Complaining that something is a pain in the ass to grind is good feedback, but that's just the beginning. We also have to peel the layer and find out what, if anything, is under that. What is the root cause? From readings and conversations, I discovered with little surprise that these players have a need for a said essence, or trinket, a set bonus, or whatever it is to make them feel relevant. They need these so they can be a good contributor to their team, so they don't have to be carried or looked down upon. To word this a little bit differently, not having said essence, trinket, or bonus will lead to they not feeling good. They feel irrelevant, worthless, and unviable. The push for account-wide essences becomes emotional very quickly, because many critics come from the viewpoint of frustration from having to go through this process again and again, and because they feel like Blizzard isn't listening to them. These emotions are very strong and very real and very complicated. We want account-wide essences. Okay, let's look deeper. Why? Because it's a pain to grind. Okay, why do you put up with the pain? Because we need to obtain these essences. Well, where does this need come from? Our need comes from the desire to be strong or viable. Well, why is that important? Because without it, we are weak and not viable. Which means what? It means we can't get into any groups, and then we just can't play. Oh, this is not a mindset that's shared by everyone, even if the desire for account-wide essences is the same. That's just a limitation of the onion analogy, so just bear with me. But for many, at least 90% or so of the conversations that I've had or observed, it would be closer to say that we as players want to feel validated. But because WoW is an MMO, I'm going to focus mostly on the social aspect. What we've been seeing for years now is the buildup of what I'm going to call the social attunement. Attunements, as we're familiar with, go all the way back to the days of vanilla WoW, with lengthy quest lines, resistances, and other hoops to jump through. Otherwise, you literally couldn't walk into a particular raid or instance. And then of course there's finding your way into a raid or a guild who will take you. Arguably the most important thing you brought to the table was that you showed up, and that if you were a paladin, you were healing. But social attunements began to form at the same time, thanks to add-ons that measured throughput, allowing players to compare their performance and, more importantly, their performance against others. As a group leader, when presented with choices, a measure of performance is a terrific way to differentiate one choice from the other. Of course, there are other factors with different quantifications, like being the raid leader's significant other, a guild officer, or the one if you think you let in, you'll make it to second base. A few years later came Wrath of the Lich King with the introduction of an add-on called Gear Score that assigned a value to gear and added it up. Gear score was both lauded and condemned, because now it was even more convenient to measure a player's worth without even having to talk to them. It's a fair critique that automated systems like the Looking for Dungeon system and later Raid Finder eroded the need for social interactions between players at a more casual level. It's also a fair critique that gear score eroded social interactions in a separate, but equally, maybe more damaging way, because it turned what could have been a human interaction, telling the story of a player's culminated experience and triumphs, and turned that into a color-coded number. The rest is history. Today's World of Warcraft has an endgame for both dungeons and raids that have the softest of restrictions built into the game, item level requirements, and or a short quest line that is almost naturally completed. But we also have a system of social attunements that apply pressures to players to meet requirements that members of the community have set and that they have come to accept. What's your item level? What's your Raider IO score? What's your ranking on Warcraft logs? These aren't questions that are actually asked, really. They're curiosities that can be satisfied with just a glance. Between sites like Raider IO, WoW Progress, and Wowhead, all the information we need is just a few keystrokes away. The era of discovery gave way to data mining, and we can argue that more than half the game is already played for us. All that's left is to execute on the plans, rotations, and the weak ores that are laid out for us. Today's World of Warcraft, maybe today's era of gaming, is less of an adventure of trials and triumphs, and more of a series of expected outcomes that leaves almost no room for mistakes, and if there are, the results can be quite toxic. This didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't the work of a single person. It's not even really appropriate to blame the World of Warcraft dev team, just like it's not appropriate to say that it's the players that did this to themselves. It just happened. Between calls for transparency and an internet that was moving towards an age of social media, constant updates and eroding of patience, a gaming industry that appealed to the notion of top score, trophies, and achievements. Where yesterday's World of Warcraft might have asked for little more than a warm body and the know-how to set up a TeamSpeak or Ventrilo server, today's WoW demands a high item level, strong essences, and a good Raider IO score before even being acknowledged by others, before these players even acknowledge themselves. We also have a small army of analysts, data miners, mathematicians, theory crafters, and pundits, who I unceremoniously lump myself in with, who dissect shifts and changes with a critical eye. The very tone of dev speak is turned into a minute-long takedown by someone who's trying to push a narrative. We've come a pretty long way from the days of laughing off our mistakes, and we live in a world of expectation craft, where everyone is supposed to be a know-it-all, or should be doing what the know-it-alls say. Where so-called outrage merchants, folding ideas came up with that. Good one. Outrage merchants set the tone and narrative of what is the community's feedback, what is good and bad for the future of Warcraft. Meanwhile, the silent majority is still silent. WoW's dev team has to pretty much place their hands on a box that we'll call the database, and use osmosis or some other method to accurately guess what the majority of players want several years in advance. But ultimately, this isn't what we would call an issue, or even a problem that needs solving. It simply is. It's a culture that has been built into the game, and this culture is something that some of us may not define as our World of Warcraft, but it's very loud and very influential. The players who value WoW in a different way, through exploration, roleplay, cosmetics, or other systems, command a negligible presence at best, because there's no competitive nature in that space. The original example cited in this video essay, account-wide essences, is a problem with a solution. After all, this was about alts. Players did put in the work at one time, and it's an easy argument to say that it's punitive to ask for the same amount of work to be put in each and every time. But this is just a symptom of a culture of gaming where some, maybe many players, make an effort to justify entitlement after imprisoning themselves with a social attunement. I feel like I still live in a bubble where it's okay to do our best with what we have. I'm in the minority when I say that it's as great or even a greater accomplishment to succeed in the World of Warcraft, not because you obeyed the social attunement, but you succeeded in spite of it.